Hi, I'm Adam Roberts, and welcome to another episode of Razorback Reels. Unfortunately, my regular co-host, Cody Hildebrand, has a cold, so he won't be able to join us tonight. But we do have a very special substitute host, the UATV ficus tree. Yeah, I agree. It is really great to be here. Later in the show, we're going to have a discussion about cinema censorship in America, but we're going to start out by reviewing the movies of this weekend. The first off is American Gangster, starring Russell Crowe and Denzel Washington.
The thing in business is honesty.
Bribery, extortion,
Integrity, hard work,
murder, racketeering.
family. Never forgetting where we came from.
Who is this guy?
See, you are what you are in this world. That's either one or two things. Either you're somebody, or you ain't nobody.
Directed by Ridley Scott, American Gangster tells two parallel stories. One of Denzel Washington, who plays the role of a real-life gangster, Frank Lucas, who builds an empire up from a small group in Harlem into a sort of an international cabal. And it also tells the story of Richie Roberts, a Jewish police officer who is something very rare in movies, an honest cop. Near the beginning of the film, he actually turns in $1 million in unmarked bills when everyone else urges him not to. Now, it's a very good movie, but it could have been a much better movie than it was. The acting, of course, is superb. Russell Crowe hasn't done anything bad his entire life practically, and Denzel Washington really shines here. Ridley Scott tries to make this sort of a difference between the French Connection. Some of the characters actually talk about that in here, and he tries to actually portray Russell Crowe as an honest cop, which isn't something you find a lot, and that was really interesting. The problem is the movie runs at 2 hours and 40 minutes long, which is way too long for this movie. The pacing is slow at parts. I was sitting back there yawning, and it's very disappointing because it could have been a much better movie. The violence is pretty graphic. You do see Frank Lucas shoot a few people at point blank. And that's actually one of the more interesting parts about it too, because a lot of times you'll have sort of the violent sex stuff in it, or drug dealers as these really cool guys, and Ridley Scott really could have gone this route, especially with using Denzel Washington. But instead the film maybe takes a note from Traffic and shows the bad effects of the drug dealing that it has on everyone. It juxtaposes the nice house he's bought for his family and sort of this American success story with people lying on the couch dead because of the heroin that Frank Lucas has sold them. And I would have liked to see this thing develop a bit more too, because it just sort of presents it there just once in the film very quickly and doesn't say anything else about it. And I really enjoyed this movie. See it if you enjoy good acting, but it's not an Oscar contender for me, when it really could have been if they just would have polished the script up maybe a little bit more, maybe had a couple of rewrites. Other than that, I do recommend it, so I gave it a B. I'll avoid an obvious pun now, because we're going to talk about B movies starring Jerry Seinfeld and Renee Zellweger.
We've got the sunflower patch in quadrant 9.
What happened to you? Where are you?
I'm going out.
Out? Out where?
Out there.
Oh, no!
I have to, before I go to work for the rest of my life.
You're gonna die! You're crazy! Hello?
Oh, another call coming in.
Crazy!
If anyone's feeling brave, there's a Korean deli on 83rd that gets their roses today. Hey, guys.
Well, look at that.
Isn't that the kid we saw yesterday?
Hold it, son. Flight deck's restricted.
All right, B Movies follows the story of Barry the Bee, who grows up in the hive, and his entire life is built around work. And I mean, he asks, "Are you going to work us to death?" And the answer is, "Yes, we hope so." And he's not really content with this situation, so he tries to leave the hive, breaks the rules, makes friends with humans, falls in love with a human, which makes for some awkward humor there, and eventually changes the world. And you'll see how if you watch the movie. And the reviews I read of this at first, before I saw the movie, were pretty bad. So I enjoyed the movie a lot more than I thought I would, and I would recommend it, especially if you have a family, because there are so few decent family movies that they're making right now. But this is another movie that sort of suffered from plot structure. you'd have a really nice film for about the first hour. Then the last half hour is sort of an added-on bonus plot that just, it really was tacked on. And of course, Jerry Seinfeld produced the film. He's been in semi-retirement from television and movies since his famous series ended, Seinfeld. And he's not as funny as he used to be. Most of the jokes fall flat. Like in Disney Pixar's movie Ratatouille, the plot is very strong and it's very enjoyable and engrossing, but there aren't very many one-liners that are funny. I mean, you have one about a mosquito being an attorney, and you have Ray Liotta in another one, but it's not hilarious. You're not going to be laughing the entire time. And plot-wise, I thought it was very interesting because I'm not the only person to see this, but it's like a critique of communism. I mean, the first hour of the movie seems like it could have been called Paul and Shrugged or whatever. But it's something you should take your kids to see too if they don't have anything else they want on DVD. The voice acting is very good. I just wish it could have been a lot funnier than it was. For a movie that I can recommend that you definitely see is V for Vendetta, which is my DVD pick for the week.
With a nice holiday, I thought we could mark this November the 5th, a day that is sadly no longer remembered, by taking some time out of our daily lives to sit down and have a little chat. There are, of course, those who do not want us to speak.
Let me think, just let me think.
In fact, even now, orders are being shouted into telephones, and men with guns will soon be on their way.
It's Chancellor Sutler.
Damn it! Why? Because while the truncheon may be used in lieu of conversation, words will always retain their power.
All right, V for Vendetta, of course, is a fantastic movie. You will have a hard time finding it in rental stores today because, of course, it is the 5th of November. And if you don't already know, Vendetta follows the story in futuristic England when the War on Terror has converted society into a totalitarian empire, which, of course, could never happen today. And it follows the story of an anarchist terrorist who tries to change society in his own controversial way. It's based on a 1980s graphic novel by Alan Moore, and it's not the best movie in the world, but it's very, very good, and of course it is very, very cool. It stars Natalie Portman and Hugo Weaving, and Natalie Portman finally making a good film after Star Wars days. And this is something that every college student, if they haven't seen it, they definitely should see it. Whether you agree with the politics in it or not, it's a terrific film. And we're going to take a quick break now, but I hope you'll join us afterwards for our discussion about cinema censorship. And we have a trivia question to think about while we're on break. The Muppet Rizzo the Rat was named after a character in what Best Picture-winning 1969 Dustin Hoffman film? And a hint, if you couldn't get that right, it also stars Jon Voight, Angelina Jolie's father.
Your dad. One time, we all had dinner in the car. Mom says you have to come in now.
When I wake up in the morning and the alarm gives out a warning, I don't think I'll ever make it on time. By the time I grab my books and I give myself a look, I'm at the corner just in time to see the bus fly by. It's alright, cause I'm safe by the. It's alright, cause I'm safe by the. It's alright, cause I'm safe by the bell.
All right, and the answer to the question, of course, is Midnight Cowboy. Dustin Hoffman plays a character named Rizzo, who is John Voight's best friend, and his attitude was adapted for Jim Henson's Muppet character. Well, what did you think about the movie so far? I agree with you mostly, but I liked American Gangster a lot better than that. And this will be your last episode. Now, we're going to turn to a more serious discussion of cinema censorship in America. We live in a culture nowadays that looks down on book burning as something that Nazis and communists do, but we're also very readily easy to boycott films that we disagree with. And I'm just going to take a brief look at the history of cinema censorship and boycotts and what it means. I mean, we can focus on censorship such as nudity or violence, and that's important to fight. But even more important is fighting censorship over political issues. And probably the biggest touchstone for this, probably the most controversial film of all time, as well as one of the most important to defend, is D.W. Griffith's 1915 film, Birth of a Nation. It's based on a novel called The Klansman, and the story pretty much follows the Southern myth of the black people, after being released from slavery, pretty much destroying the South by being elected, and the Ku Klux Klan forms and saves the South. It's a very racist film, and there's no way to get around it. It was highly controversial in its time, though. Woodrow Wilson, the president, gave favorable reviews to the film and was trashed by it in the media and later had to retract his statements. And the NAACP, which had just started up a few years earlier, organized massive boycotts to protest the film. And it's a tough film to defend. I mean, plot-wise alone, its effects were felt throughout the country. The Ku Klux Klan's resurgence in the 1920s is partially attributed to the popularity of this film, which was the highest-grossing movie in American history until Gone with the Wind. And there's at least one instance of where a white man came out of the movie theater and killed a black child. So it's very difficult to defend. But I think that you still have to allow films like Birth of a Nation to be shown in theaters and to be shown in film lecture classes, even though even today the NAACP will hold boycotts and protests over theaters that show these films. I mean, there's been retrospectives on D.W. Griffith's work in his life without showing Birth of a Nation, which was his most important film. And this was really the first full-length feature film that was widely spread popular. It pretty much created the modern film grammar. With that, before Birth of a Nation, you didn't really have cutaways, you didn't have the close-ups, you didn't have the mise-en-scenes. It's one of the most important films of all time, if not the most important film of all time. And this is just sort of a keystone for what I'm going to talk about the entire night. Just because you disagree with the message of a movie, you still have to watch it. And you can appreciate the art of the movie without agreeing with everything that it says. And when you boycott a film because of its message, it intimidates writers and directors and producers from making high-quality movies about what they believe in. And probably one of the most violent examples, at least in recent America, is the 1976 film The Message, released by Film Co. International. And The Message tells the story of Muhammad, the prophet of God. It was made by Muslim Mustafa Akkad, who wanted to tell the story to his American friends. Of course, as we all know, under Muslim law, Muhammad and his immediate family cannot be portrayed in art or on screen. So what he did was he told the story through the eyes of Anthony Quinn, one of Muhammad's friends or cousins, and Muhammad was always off screen. You never heard him spoke. So he went by the rules. Unfortunately, this was still a controversial movie. in March 1977, the Hanafi black Muslim group took over some buildings in Washington, D.C., including one city building just 2 blocks from the White House. And among their demands was that all the copies of the message were to be destroyed. And this, of course, was horrible. There were 134 people that were held hostage by the terrorist group for a few days. They killed one radio reporter. They shot and injured future D.C. Mayor Marion Barry. And it was just a huge disaster. So the director, Akkad, spoke with the group, and he offered to let them see the movie, and if they hated it, he said he would even destroy all the copies. But they refused. The movie disagreed with their religious principles, and so it wasn't just fine for them not to see it. They wanted to make sure that nobody else could see it either. And of course, this sort of censorship is not only done by Muslims. Martin Scorsese's famous controversial film, the 1988 Universal Pictures release, The Last Temptation of Christ, got similar reactions from Catholic and Christian groups. It stars Willem Dafoe in sort of a retelling based on a novel about Jesus Christ, and it intentionally strays away from the New Testament account to give a different perspective on it. It's an incredibly spiritual and uplifting movie. The problem with it, at least in the eyes of the groups that protested, was that it shows Jesus being tempted to marry Mary Magdalene and have the same temptations as other people, and he overcomes them in the film. But many groups found this highly offensive. And some of the people who found it offensive decided to boycott, of course. The Vatican asked people not to see it. There were massive protests. In France, there were riots. One theater was bombed, actually, and people had to go to prison for many years when that plot was uncovered. And it was just threats and intimidation all over. Blockbuster Video still will not carry the Last Temptation of Christ in their stores, although you can order online from them. And, of course, another film about a couple decades later, The Passion of the Christ, 20th Century Fox's release of Mel Gibson's film, got a lot of controversy as well, although not from Christian groups, this time from Jewish groups. The Anti-Defamation League, which worries about anti-Semitism, saw that this movie would be anti-Semitic before it even came out. Now, Mel Gibson stuck with the account of the New Testament verse by verse, and he even changed some of the parts and took it out of the finished film to not appear anti-Semitic. But they still complained that Jewish characters were cast with ugly actors, et cetera, and they worried about pogroms coming back, and none of this ever materialized. And the Anti-Defamation League does not, as a rule, call for boycotts, but it was very well implied that people should protest and not see this movie. And fortunately, audiences responded to it very well, and The Passion of the Christ became one of the highest grossing films of all time. And it helped to prove that controversy can sell in Hollywood. Another beneficiary of this, of course, was Michael Moore in his 2004 release for Lionsgate's films Fahrenheit 9/11. And Fahrenheit 9/11 is Michael Moore's entertainment documentary about the Iraq War and the Bush administration. It was made to try and prevent President George W. Bush from being reelected. And, of course, it touched off huge lightning rods of controversy. Fox News Channel, among others, I don't want to say campaigned against it, but they pretty much did. They equated it with anti-Americanism and anti-Westernism, and you can make a very good case. It did not get a lot of its facts right, and it's, at least in my opinion, far too harsh on the Bush administration in a lot of areas. However, even though I disagree with Michael Moore on most of the issues he's brought up, I still really love his films, and I think it's very wrong to boycott a movie just because you disagree with it. For example, imagine if the boycotts about Fahrenheit 9/11 had worked and Michael Moore was shut down. It almost did work. Disney, of course, would not pick up Fahrenheit 9/11, and he had to go to the independent or more independent studio, Lionsgate Films, to get it released. And if movies that try and persuade viewers of something can't be released, then we lose a huge part of the cultural conversation. Film has the unique ability to affect us emotionally and directly. If you want hardcore facts, then you sit down and you read a political treatise. You don't see a movie. But if you want something that is really going to get you motivated to help change the world, then you watch a propaganda film like Fahrenheit 9/11. And a lot of conservatives that didn't like the movie took the appropriate response and made their own movies. Fahrenheit 9/11 is just one example. A lot of other people tried to get it boycotted, tried to get it banned, they tried to get it removed from theaters, and in some cases they were successful, which is very unfortunate to the movie-going public as a whole. And the next year, of course, saw a lot of controversial films. The most famous one is Brokeback Mountain, released by Focus Features. And Brokeback Mountain touched off the same lightning rod of criticism that Fahrenheit 9/11 did. It tells the story of two cowboys who have a homosexual relationship, and it portrays it in a pretty positive light. It's pretty just tell of two star-crossed lovers who can't be together because of societal prejudice, and it doesn't really hit you over the head with its message, but it's obviously there. And of course there were the usual protests and calls for boycotts, and in my home state of Utah, Larry H. Miller, the Utah Jazz owner, hours before Brokeback Mountain was to show in his theaters, he closed it down and said he would never show it in there because it would offend the traditional family. Now, I can understand if you don't want to show a movie or see a movie because of sexual content or graphic content, but you had the movie Hostel playing right next door in the house near where Brokeback Mountain was supposed to play. His only problem with it was political. And all the Utah friends I've had seen it, it's not a cultural thing. It was Larry H. Miller's problem with it and his feeling that he should be the judge of what people should see and what people should think. And that's where the problem comes in with cinema censorship. Just because you disagree with a movie doesn't mean you shouldn't see it or that you should try and get rid of it. And unfortunately, these boycotts do affect studios. In December 2005, Walt Disney Pictures released The Chronicles of Narnia, based on C.S. Lewis's book. And they're fairly explicit Christian allegory. When I was growing up, I read them dozens of times. I mean, they're some of my favorite books. So I was very upset when, in the fall of 2005, Walt Disney Pictures tried to play down the religious content of its films. The director, Andrew Adamson, actually is quoted in a newspaper as saying that when he read the books, he didn't realize Aslan was supposed to be Jesus. He thought he was supposed to just be a great line. You have to be a complete moron not to understand that that's Jesus. What Walt Disney was afraid of was that people would take their kids to go see a movie that had a religious agenda. They were afraid that atheist and agnostic groups, Jewish groups, Muslim groups would protest and boycott because they were to be offended that a movie happened to have a religious viewpoint that was different from their own. There weren't a lot of boycotts over Narnia, fortunately, but it was still just really sad to see a major studio take that sort of preemptive action. Of course, their actions weren't entirely crazy. People do boycott over stupid things. In 2004, 2006, I'm sorry, the Da Vinci Code was released by Columbia Pictures to the chagrin of a lot of Christian and especially Catholic groups. It doesn't portray the Catholic Church in a very positive light. I'm sure you're already familiar with the story about how they cover up the truth about Jesus Christ's life, and it portrays the Catholic group Opus Dei in an extremely negative light as pretty much bloodthirsty monks. And the Catholic League for Religious and Civil Liberties, which is not affiliated with the Catholic Church, just went on an all-out media campaign against this. They tried to get it shut down in several theaters, wrote letters, went on television asking them to stop it. They wanted a disclaimer put at the beginning of the movie saying that it's a work of fiction. I mean, the Da Vinci Code was not supposed to be like Fahrenheit 9/11 or The Last Temptation of Christ. It's an entertainment popcorn flick, and it was marketed that way. There are a few people who took it too seriously, but there's people who take Harry Potter too seriously. And for even just a work of fiction to not be allowed to use somebody as a bad guy because someone's going to complain is just absurd. You saw the same thing with Flight Plan, starring Jodie Foster, when the Flight Attendants Union boycotted the movie because it portrayed flight attendants as uncaring. They weren't even the bad guys, they were just uncaring, so the movie shouldn't be shown. I mean, the consequence of this sort of thinking is pretty obvious. Then you can't have any movie with anybody as a bad guy. I mean, unfortunately, Christians and Catholics have their own problems when trying to get movies with a viewpoint released as well. In 2006, the independent film company Sherwood Pictures released Facing the Giants. And Facing the Giants is, let's face it, a pretty bad movie. It's about a football team, a bunch of high schoolers learning valuable lessons about following the Bible, very saccharine, very sappy, over the top. Some people like it, if that's your thing. The problem was that they anticipated a G rating from the MPAA, and when they got back was a PG rating. So they thought maybe it's because of violence or whatever, maybe we can recut it. So when they asked the MPAA spokesperson why, they said it was because of proselytizing. Apparently, under MPAA guidelines, you can't release a movie to children that has a viewpoint that teaches them something that somebody might disagree with. I mean, this is just another example of how ridiculous people can be. I mean, personally, I disagree with the film's viewpoint too, but I'm not going to think it's inappropriate for children just because it's something I disagree with. I mean, the way to bring up a child in this country is to allow them to make up their own minds and allow them to see a variety of different viewpoints. And if you're going to convince a parent maybe not to let their young children in to see it just because it's pro-God is just as ridiculous as not letting a kid in to see a movie because it's anti-God. And if we can't have this sort of conversation in our country, then everything goes downhill. And of course, my target tonight is going to be the Catholic League with Bill Donahue. We have a clip of Bill Donahue's interview on MSNBC back in 2006 where he said some pretty controversial things.
Hollywood is controlled by secular Jews who hate Christianity in general and Catholicism in particular. It's not a secret, okay? And I'm not afraid to say it. Hollywood likes anal sex. They like to see the public square without nativity scenes. I like families. I like children.
This is the guy, Bill Donahue, who heads the Catholic League, which is not in any way affiliated with the Catholic Church. Donahue defended the Passion of the Christ against charges of anti-Semitism, and I agreed with him. But he targets every movie, every TV show that could conceivably be charged with being anti-Catholic. His biggest target is, of course, Comedy Central's South Park. He has boycotted the show several times. He actually got one episode pulled off the TV because it made fun of Catholics who believe that the Virgin Mary statues might shoot blood. And I mean, South Park, of course, has its own audience, and it's okay to be offended if you're offended by South Park and if you don't want to watch it. What Donahue and the Catholic League do is they decide that because they don't want to watch a movie or a TV show, nobody should be allowed to watch the movie or the TV show. And the Catholic League really angered me, and the whole impetus for this show was because they just announced that they're going to be boycotting New Line Cinema's release, The Golden Compass, which is based on award-winning children's book. Their problem with The Golden Compass is probably somewhat legitimate. It's based on John Milton's Paradise Lost. The Catholic Church is the bad guy, even though they don't call it the Catholic Church. And it's a children's book with a pro-freethinker ideology. It teaches kids to question religion and question religious authority. And you would say, okay, you disagree with that, don't see it. If you disagreed with Narnia, if you're not Christian, don't take your kids to see Narnia. But nobody boycotted the Chronicles of Narnia. So why are people boycotting The Golden Compass? It doesn't make any sense to me. And what makes it even more cynical about it is the Catholic League won't even come right out and explain all the reasons why they're boycotting The Golden Compass. Instead, you can go to catholicleague.org and buy their pamphlet about it for $5. And just to wrap this up, the history of cinema censorship from 1915 all the way to today is over 100 years long when you go all the way back to it. And it's a tragedy of all the movies that haven't been made, of all the movies that have been butchered, like the Disney's adaptation of A Wrinkle in Time. It gets all the soul sucked out of it because people are afraid of being controversial. If you disagree with the movie, that's fine. If you boycott it, you're going to have me to deal with. So that's all for today's show. Hopefully we'll have some lighter topics next week. Joining me, as always, is my co-host, the Ficus Tree, and we'll hope you'll see us every Monday night from 8 to 8:30 on UATV Channel 14.
spooky. So, happy Halloween, everybody.
Welcome back to Campus Crossfire. Remember that if at any point during the show you'd like to call in and tell us your opinion, the phone number is 479-575-6930, or you can email uacrossfire@yahoo.com. So happy Halloween, guys!
Well, clearly this is our Halloween episode.
Costume edition of Crossfire, in case you couldn't tell.
I dress like this all the time.